Since childhood, everyone around her knew she was not like other kids. She learned things faster than anyone could imagine. When other children played with toys, she played with numbers, shapes, and codes that no one else understood. She could take apart a radio and put it back together without help. Her teachers often stood amazed, wondering how such a young mind could think so deeply. But for her, thinking wasn't effort, it was like breathing. She was always curious. Everything fascinated her. The way light bent through glass, the way stars shimmered at night, the quiet rhythm of the rain. But the thing that pulled her most was the night sky. She could spend hours staring up at the stars, feeling a strange connection, like something out there was alive and watching her back. Her parents used to laugh gently and call her the little dreamer, but she wasn't dreaming. She felt it, something beyond Earth, something that wanted to be understood. As she grew older, her intelligence became both a gift and a curse. People admired her mind, but they didn't understand her heart. She tried making friends, but no one seemed to stay. They thought she was too strange, too quiet, too lost in her own thoughts. She didn't blame them. Even she couldn't explain what went on in her head sometimes. Late at night, when everyone was asleep, she would sit by her window with her small notebook and sketch strange patterns. They looked like musical notes mixed with symbols. She didn't know where they came from. They just appeared in her mind as if whispered by the stars. And sometimes she heard a low humming sound in her head, not like a voice, but more like a song. It wasn't scary. In fact, it was comforting, like a gentle call from far away. Years went by and her brilliance grew. By the time she was a teenager, she was already helping scientists with complex equations. Her ability to see patterns in chaos made her famous in small research circles. But deep inside, she still felt empty. Every time she looked up at the sky, that soft humming would return, stronger each time, as if the universe was trying to tell her something she couldn't yet understand. Then one night, everything changed. It was a quiet evening. The air outside was thick with the smell of rain. The sky was full of dark clouds, and thunder rolled in the distance. She sat near her window, writing in her notebook again, drawing more of those strange symbols. Lightning flashed, and for a moment she saw something unusual in the sky. 3 faint lights moving together, perfectly in sync. They weren't planes. They moved too smoothly, too deliberately. She stood up, pressing her face against the glass. The lights grew brighter. Then the ground began to shake lightly. Her heartbeat quickened. She tried to step back, but her feet froze. The sky outside seemed to open up. No sound, no explosion. Just a silent, glowing crack stretching across the clouds. A beam of soft blue light touched the ground near her house. She didn't even have time to scream before everything turned white. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't home anymore. The air was cool and thin, almost metallic. The ground beneath her shimmered like glass, glowing faintly under her feet. Around her stood tall beings with smooth silver skin and long limbs. Their faces were calm, their eyes glowing faintly like small suns. They didn't look angry or kind, just curious. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. She tried to move, but her body felt heavy. The beings spoke to each other in deep, echoing tones, clicks, growls, and musical sounds that didn't seem possible from any human throat. It was beautiful and frightening at the same time. One of them turned toward her and said something. The sound filled the air, vibrating softly. She didn't understand, but she could feel the emotion behind it. She tried to reply, stuttering out words. "Where am I? Who are you?" The beings looked at each other, then laughed. Not the kind of laugh humans share in joy, but a mocking, sharp laugh like a group of people watching a child make a mistake. Another alien made a sound, imitating her voice in a funny way. The others joined in, repeating her words like a joke. She felt a chill run through her body. They were mocking her. She didn't know why. Maybe to them, human language sounded strange. Maybe they saw her as something simple, small, and unimportant. They circled her slowly, whispering in their melodic tongue, sometimes glancing at her and chuckling in a way that made her heart ache. She wasn't used to being laughed at. She was used to respect, admiration. But now she felt like an animal being studied. Still, even through her fear and embarrassment, her mind was working. She started listening closely. The sounds they made weren't random. Every tone had a rhythm, a pitch, a direction. Some words sounded softer when they expressed care and sharper when they mocked. She realized that their language wasn't just speech, it was like music, full of emotions and layers of meaning. She didn't say a word. She just listened. For what felt like hours, the aliens spoke among themselves. She caught patterns, repetitions, the flow between their deep voices and lighter tones. She started mimicking their words in her head, repeating them silently, matching their rhythm. The more she listened, the more familiar it felt. It was as if she had heard it before in her dreams, in the humming that had followed her all her life. That realization sent a shiver down her spine. Maybe this was what she had been hearing since childhood. Maybe they were the ones calling to her. When the aliens noticed her watching them quietly, they seemed amused again. One of them came closer and spoke softly, the sound vibrating through the air like a deep bell. She didn't understand the meaning, but something in her chest responded like a forgotten part of her waking up. She whispered something back, trying to copy the tone. The aliens stopped and looked at each other. Then they burst out laughing again, as if she'd said something foolish. Their laughter echoed around her, bouncing off the glowing walls. She turned away, her eyes burning. It wasn't just mockery anymore, it was humiliation. But even in that moment, she promised herself one thing: I will understand them. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time worked differently there. The aliens often came to her, observing her reactions. They spoke to her, sometimes playfully, sometimes teasingly, testing her ability to respond. She never let them see her anger. She listened. She memorized. She began to pick out the smallest sounds, the hidden vibrations in their words. When they said a word that sounded like a growl, she realized it meant strength. When they used a softer tone, it meant peace. When they layered two sounds together, it became something entirely new. She was learning, faster than they could imagine, but they didn't know that yet. To them, she was still the noisy one, the fragile human with the strange voice. They even gave her a nickname in their tongue that roughly translated to the Little Echo. Every time she tried to speak, they repeated her words mockingly, exaggerating her tone until it sounded ridiculous. And yet, she didn't break. Each laugh they gave her became a note she remembered. Each insult became a lesson in their language, but deep down, something else was building, something powerful. It was as if her mind was connecting invisible dots between the symbols she used to draw, the sounds she heard in her dreams, and the voices of these aliens. One night, when they left her alone in her glass-like chamber, she sat quietly and hummed softly, imitating their lowest tones. The air shimmered faintly. She tried again, this time adding a pitch that felt right in her chest. Suddenly, the floor beneath her vibrated. She froze, staring around. The sound she made had power. It wasn't just echoing. It was reacting. She covered her mouth in shock. For the first time, she realized the aliens' language wasn't just communication. It was something more. It was alive. It had energy. She sat there in the faint glow, her eyes wide, her heart pounding. For years, she had felt out of place on Earth, unable to explain her strange thoughts and dreams. But now, in this cold, glowing room among creatures who mocked her, she felt something she had never felt before: purpose. She wasn't here by accident. She was meant to be here. She looked up toward the alien lights outside the chamber and whispered softly, "I will learn your voice." The sound echoed faintly through the room, almost like the place itself was listening. Somewhere deep inside her, she felt the same humming she had heard all her life. Growing stronger, she didn't know it yet. But this was the beginning of something that would change everything. The moment a human girl would unlock a language older than the stars, and the same beings who mocked her would soon kneel before her in awe. When she woke up again, she didn't know how long it had been. There was no sun, no clock, no way to measure time on this strange ship. The air was cool and the walls glowed faintly, like the entire place was alive and breathing. She felt weak, but her mind was still sharp. The aliens were back. This time there were more of them, tall, silver beings with large dark eyes that seemed to shine like mirrors. They were watching her carefully, whispering in their musical language. She could hear their tones rising and falling, soft and deep, almost like a song. She listened closely, recognizing a few familiar sounds she had studied quietly before. One of them stepped forward, holding a small, crystal-like object that floated above its palm. It glowed faintly, changing colors as it pulsed. The alien said something in a calm, steady tone, and the crystal released a beam of light that scanned her body. She flinched, but there was no pain. It was just warm, like sunlight on her skin. They were studying her again, She wanted to ask why. She wanted to know what they saw in her. But every time she tried to speak, they laughed. The same mocking tone, the same deep, echoing laughter that made her feel smaller than she had ever felt in her life. But this time, she didn't cry. She just looked at them quietly, her eyes steady, her mind awake. Every sound they made, she captured it in her memory. Every symbol that appeared on the glowing walls, she studied it. The aliens didn't notice that the little human they were teasing was learning faster than they could imagine. Later, they led her into another room, larger and brighter. The walls here weren't smooth. They were covered with strange carvings, lines that glowed like fire when she looked at them too long. In the middle of the room was a wide platform shaped like a circle. It pulsed with faint blue light, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. She was told to stand on it. When she stepped forward, the floor beneath her feet shimmered. The aliens surrounded the circle, speaking softly among themselves. The tones were slow and serious this time. They weren't mocking her now, they were testing something. The platform lit up, and in an instant, visions filled her mind. Stars, dragons, glowing orbs flying through galaxies, and a deep voice that felt older than time. She gasped, almost falling. But one of the aliens steadied her with a cold, smooth hand. The vision faded, and the light dimmed again. She was trembling. She looked at them, her voice shaking. "What was that?" The aliens didn't reply. One of them made a short sound that almost resembled a sigh and turned away. But she could tell by the flicker in their eyes that even they didn't fully understand what had happened. As they left her alone in that bright room, she sat down on the cold floor and thought deeply. That vision, it wasn't random. It felt like a memory, something ancient buried deep inside her. And that voice she heard wasn't new. She had heard it before in her dreams, whispering in that same strange language. Maybe this was the connection she'd felt all her life. Maybe this was why she was different. The following cycles, she didn't know if they were days or nights, were all the same. The aliens brought her food that shimmered like liquid silver, though it tasted like nothing she could describe. They tested her reflexes, her thoughts, her reactions to sounds and lights. And each time they spoke to her in their own language, half amused, half curious. She tried speaking back, repeating small words she remembered. They always laughed. One alien once pointed at her and made a joke in their tongue. The others chuckled, covering their mouths. But even laughter couldn't stop her determination. She kept learning silently. She started to understand their rhythm better. She realized that their language was built on harmony, like singing in multiple voices at once. Each sound had layers. The deeper tone carried command or feeling. The higher tone added meaning. It wasn't just about words. It was about emotion, vibration, and intent. When she figured that out, everything started to click in her mind. One time, when the aliens entered her room, she pretended to be asleep. She heard them talking about her, using softer tones than before. She caught fragments of their words, things like potential, impossible, and resonance. That last word came with a strange vibration in their voice, one that made the air around her hum faintly. Resonance. She repeated that sound in her head for hours, trying to match their tone silently. When she finally whispered it perfectly, the air trembled faintly just for a second. She gasped in awe. That night, when she was alone, she couldn't stop thinking about the vision she saw, the dragons made of light, flying through endless stars. The sound they made in that vision was the same sound the aliens used when they spoke certain words. She started to suspect that the aliens' language wasn't their own. Maybe they had learned it from someone or something long ago. Maybe those dragons were real. The next time the aliens came, one of them brought a new device, a floating orb that emitted waves of sound. It made deep hums that filled the room, vibrating through her bones. They seemed to be testing the effect on her, but something strange happened. The orb's light started to flicker when she hummed back softly. The aliens froze, surprised. She wasn't supposed to react like that. One of them tilted its head, studying her. Another adjusted the orb, increasing the vibration. She closed her eyes, focusing on the tone. She matched it again, humming softly with the same rhythm, and the orb began to move toward her, glowing brighter. The aliens shouted in their language, rushing to shut it off. When the orb finally dimmed, the room went silent. Every alien stared at her. She looked up, confused. "What did I do?" she asked softly. They didn't answer. One of them finally said something in a tone she hadn't heard before, a mix of fear and awe. She caught only one familiar word: resonance. After that, they became more cautious around her. They stopped mocking her openly. Some even watched her quietly, as if trying to figure out what she was. But she could still feel their curiosity and a hint of fear. She kept practicing in secret. Every time she was alone, she tried to make the same low tones she had heard from them, adjusting her voice until she could almost match it perfectly. Sometimes she felt a gentle warmth in her chest, as if her body was responding to the sound. One day, the leader of the aliens, a taller one with glowing lines running down its face, entered her chamber. It spoke in a serious tone she had never heard before. The other alien stepped back respectfully. The leader looked at her with those bright eyes and said something that felt like a command. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the intent. It wanted her to follow. They led her through a long hallway filled with transparent walls where she could see other worlds projected outside. She saw planets, stars, and swirling blue storms that looked like oceans floating in space. It was breathtaking. Finally, they stopped at a large door made of black crystal. The leader touched it and it opened silently. Inside was a massive chamber, dark and quiet except for a single pillar in the middle that glowed faintly gold. The air felt heavy, full of energy. She felt drawn to that pillar like something inside it was calling her. The leader looked at her and spoke slowly. The sounds were low, heavy, almost sacred. Then it pointed at the pillar. She hesitated. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered. The leader didn't reply. It just waited. She took a deep breath and stepped closer. The pillar's glow brightened with every step. She could hear faint whispers now, not from the aliens, but from the air itself. Voices speaking the same language, soft and ancient. She reached out and placed her hand on the surface. In an instant, her mind filled with light. She saw flashes of creatures, massive winged dragons made of pure energy, their scales shining like molten gold. They roared, but it wasn't a sound of anger. It was communication. The same melodic tones she had been hearing all her life. And then, she saw something that froze her heart. A dragon turned its head and looked directly at her. Its eyes glowed like suns, and its voice echoed inside her mind, not in words, but in emotion. It said something she didn't fully understand, but she felt its meaning. "Our voice lives in you." She fell backward, gasping for air. The pillar's glow faded. The aliens rushed to her, checking if she was alive. She was trembling, but she managed to whisper, "I heard them. I understood." The leader's eyes widened. It said something quickly to the others. Their voices rose in a mix of shock and confusion. She caught a few words, old ones like dragon, origin, and echo. She realized they had never expected this. Whatever that pillar was, it reacted to her alone. As they led her back to her room, she could see the way they looked at her had changed. No more laughter, no more mockery, only silence, curiosity, and disbelief. That night, as she sat quietly in her chamber, she looked out through the glass wall at the stars outside. The familiar humming returned in her mind, stronger than ever, but this time she understood faint parts of it. It was a song, a greeting. For the first time in her life, she smiled softly. She was no longer just a human genius lost in her thoughts. She was part of something much larger, something ancient and beautiful, and deep down she knew this was only the beginning. The next time she opened her eyes, the room looked different. The soft blue glow was gone, replaced by a warm golden light that pulsed gently through the walls, as if the place was breathing with her. The air felt heavier, richer, like something invisible had changed. She sat up slowly, still dizzy from what had happened at the pillar. Her mind was filled with fragments of that vision, dragons made of light, their voices blending with stars, that deep ancient tone that said, "Our voice lives in you." She couldn't stop hearing it. It echoed softly inside her head over and over like a melody that refused to fade. When the door slid open, 2 aliens entered. Their glowing eyes watched her in silence. They didn't laugh this time. Their faces looked calm but serious. One of them motioned for her to follow. She hesitated for a second, then stood up. Her legs felt weak, but she followed quietly. The hallway outside was glowing brighter than before, and she noticed something she hadn't before. Every wall, every surface had tiny carvings that looked like the same symbols she used to draw back on Earth. That realization sent a chill down her spine. How could she have drawn them before even seeing this place? As she walked, she caught glimpses of other rooms. In one, she saw floating orbs showing projections of galaxies and moving star maps. In another, tall aliens stood around a circular table discussing something in fast, low tones. They stopped and looked at her as she passed by. Their expressions weren't mocking now. They looked uncertain, almost uneasy. Finally, she was led into a new chamber, larger than the others. The ceiling was covered with flowing light like moving water. In the center was a wide platform surrounded by tall crystal pillars. The leader was already there, waiting. The tall alien's presence filled the room. Its glowing patterns pulsed slowly, and its voice, when it spoke, was deep and steady, vibrating through the air. The girl couldn't understand the words, but she could sense the weight behind them. Then something unexpected happened. The leader began to speak in a much slower, clearer rhythm, as if trying to make her understand. The sounds were soft and melodic, and though she couldn't translate them, she recognized one: resonance. Her heart skipped a beat. She took a small step forward and repeated the word, copying its tone as best as she could. The aliens froze. A long silence filled the room. Then the leader turned to the others and spoke quickly in their language. The crystals around them began to glow brighter. She didn't know what she had done wrong. "Did I say something bad?" she whispered. The leader looked back at her. Its eyes flickered, and for the first time its voice softened. It made a low humming sound, one she instantly recognized. The same kind of sound she used to hear in her dreams. Without thinking, she replied with the same tone, her voice trembling but firm. The air changed. The sound she made seemed to awaken something inside the room. The pillars began to vibrate softly, glowing with a golden light that spread across the floor like ripples in water. The alien stepped back, clearly startled. Her chest felt warm, as if her heart was singing. She closed her eyes and followed the rhythm that was forming naturally in her mind. It wasn't just sound. It was emotion, connection, memory. When she finally stopped, the room fell completely silent. The leader stepped closer and spoke one slow sentence in that same tone. She didn't understand every word, but one phrase echoed clearly in her mind. "The voice of the dragons." She looked at them, confused. "What does that mean?" The aliens didn't answer right away. The leader gestured toward one of the walls, and instantly, a projection appeared, a vast space full of stars. And in the middle of it, enormous golden creatures flying gracefully, their bodies made of shimmering energy. Dragons. The same ones she had seen in her vision. The leader pointed at the image, then at her, and repeated softly, "The voice." It took her a moment to understand what they were saying. They believed she spoke the same ancient language as those dragons. Her head spun. How could that be possible? She was just a human. The leader lowered its head slightly, almost like a sign of respect, and said something that sounded like a chant. The other aliens followed, repeating it together. Their voices filled the room in harmony like a choir. It was beautiful, haunting, and powerful. She didn't realize tears were streaming down her face. For the first time, she wasn't being mocked. She was being honored, but even then, confusion filled her heart. She looked up at them and said softly, "Why me? Why would I know this language?" The leader paused. It made a gesture toward the glowing symbols on the floor. Slowly, they rearranged themselves into shapes: stars, galaxies, and finally, a small blue planet. Earth. Then it pointed at her again. She stared at the image, realizing what they were trying to say. Somehow, long ago, the dragon's voice, this ancient energy, had reached Earth, maybe through sound, through light, or through something even deeper. And somehow it had chosen her. The leader then did something unexpected. It raised its hand and placed it gently on her forehead. A soft golden light spread from its touch, and suddenly flashes filled her mind again. She saw ancient worlds, civilizations communicating through songs of power, and at the center of it all, a glowing voice, the same resonance she carried within. When the light faded, she gasped for air. The alien stepped back respectfully. Now she understood a little more. That dragon language wasn't just words, it was energy that connected living things across time and space. And somehow it lived in her voice. After that day, the alien's behavior changed completely. They stopped laughing, stopped treating her as a test subject. They started treating her like something sacred, something they needed to understand. They brought her to different parts of the ship, libraries of light, halls filled with strange floating books that moved when she hummed near them. They showed her how their ship responded to sound, not touch, and every time she spoke a little in their language, the machines reacted in ways that shocked even them. Lights would flicker, symbols would change, and sometimes the entire ship would hum back, as if greeting her. One night, while resting in her chamber, she heard the humming again, but this time it wasn't from her head. It came from outside. The walls shimmered, showing the vast blackness of space. And there, far in the distance, she saw something glowing faintly, a golden light moving slowly, almost like it was alive. She pressed her hand to the glass. "What is that?" she whispered. The door opened behind her. It was the leader again. It looked at the golden light and said one word she had learned to recognize. Ancient. The light outside moved closer. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a planet. It was a shape, massive, elegant, and familiar. It had wings made of energy, eyes that glowed like fire. Her heart stopped. It was a dragon. The aliens fell silent. The entire ship trembled slightly, not in fear, but in reverence. The leader bowed its head and the others followed. The dragon outside moved slowly, circling their ship once, leaving a trail of golden sparks behind. It wasn't attacking, it was observing. Then she heard it. The voice, deep, ancient, and calm. It spoke directly into her mind. "Child of Earth, you carry our forgotten sound." Her knees went weak. She felt tears forming again. Who are you?" she whispered. "We are what they once worshipped. We are what they forgot. But you remembered our song." Before she could respond, the light began to fade and the dragon drifted away into the stars, leaving behind a trail that shimmered like fireflies in space. When she turned back, every alien was staring at her, silent, overwhelmed. The leader finally spoke softly with awe in its voice. "You called it?" She shook her head, whispering, "No. It called me." For the rest of that night, the ship moved quietly, no laughter, no noise, only silence and respect. The aliens avoided her chamber, but not out of fear, out of reverence. She sat by the window, staring at the endless stars, realizing how far she was from Earth, yet how close she felt to something much older and grander than any world. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure. Something inside her had awakened. That voice, that energy, that connection, it wasn't random. It was destiny. And while she didn't yet know why the dragon's language had chosen her, she knew this was only the beginning of her true purpose. The girl sat in silence inside the glass chamber. She didn't know how long she had been there. The light around her was dim, the air cold and heavy. Time didn't seem to move the same way here. She could see the aliens walking past, their glowing eyes flickering every now and then as if they were laughing. Their tall figures and metallic skin made them look more like living machines than real beings. They spoke to one another in deep, rhythmic tones that echoed through the hall like waves, and whenever she tried to speak or ask something, they turned to her and made sounds that mimicked her words as if mocking her. At first, she tried to stay calm. She told herself they were just curious. Maybe they didn't understand human behavior. But soon their laughter began to hurt. Every time she tried to speak, one of them would copy her voice in a funny tone, and the others would make strange sounds that seemed like laughter. It wasn't cruel in a human way, but it carried the same meaning. Mockery. She realized they didn't see her as a guest or an equal. To them, she was just an experiment, a primitive creature who made noises that meant nothing. She stopped talking for a while after that. Instead, she began to listen. Every word they spoke, every tone they used, she memorized. Their language wasn't just words, it was sound mixed with emotion, like music. When they were angry, their tones grew deeper and sharper. When they were curious, the sounds became softer, almost like a hum. She started to understand patterns, rhythms, and small meanings between their tones. It was complicated, but something inside her felt connected to it, as if she had heard it before. Maybe in her dreams, maybe deep within her memory. Days passed, or maybe weeks. She couldn't tell. She had stopped counting time. Instead, she spent her days sitting quietly in the corner, her eyes half closed, repeating their sounds in her mind. Sometimes she would whisper a few tones softly to herself, testing how they felt on her tongue. The sounds were strange but familiar, like forgotten words from another lifetime. She didn't know why she felt so close to them. The aliens, meanwhile, seemed to find her behavior amusing. One of them, taller than the rest, would often come near the chamber and tap the glass while making a sharp, mocking sound. The others would follow, repeating the same sound in a chorus. It reminded her of school days when other kids laughed at her for being different. She thought she had left that behind, but here it was again. Only now it came from creatures not even human. Inside, something began to break. It wasn't anger exactly, it was more like pressure. A heavy weight in her chest. She had spent her life solving problems and understanding things others couldn't. But now she couldn't even speak without being laughed at. She started doubting herself. Maybe she really was just a strange creature to them. Maybe humans were as small and primitive as they thought. The idea stung her heart. One day, as the aliens gathered again around her chamber, she heard them speaking more clearly than ever before. Their tones echoed in a rhythm she could almost translate. One of them said something that she somehow understood, not in English, but in meaning. It said, "She copies our noise but doesn't understand our spirit." The others laughed in reply, their deep voices blending together in a mocking harmony. That was the moment she felt something snap inside her. Her body trembled. Her breathing grew fast and her heart pounded hard. She didn't care anymore if they laughed. She didn't care if they thought she was weak. She stood up suddenly, her hands shaking, and shouted, "Stop!" But the word came out broken, filled with frustration and tears. The aliens paused for a second. Then one of them copied her voice again, saying, "Stop," in a funny tone. They laughed. She covered her ears and screamed again, but this time something changed. Her voice cracked halfway through, but instead of fading, it grew stronger, deeper, richer. The sound that came out wasn't human anymore. It rolled through the chamber like thunder, filled with tones and harmonics that even she didn't understand. The walls vibrated, the glass shimmered, and suddenly the laughter stopped. Every alien in the room froze. Their glowing eyes widened. The air itself seemed to thicken. For the first time, they looked frightened. The girl didn't realize what had happened. Her breath was shaky, her voice still echoing faintly around her. The strange sound had come from deep inside her chest, as if it had been waiting there all along. It wasn't something she had learned. It was something she had remembered. The tall alien who used to mock her stepped closer, but now his movements were slow and cautious. He said something softly, and she understood a few words this time. It was something like, "How do you speak the dragon tongue?" Dragon tongue. The words made no sense, yet they sounded right. She didn't know how to answer. Her mind raced, and before she could think, the same deep, melodic sounds came out of her again. The aliens all took a step back. Their faces showed awe and fear. One of them tapped a panel on the wall. The lights changed color from silver to gold. A deep humming filled the air, like the sound of massive wings beating in the distance. The floor trembled lightly. Something ancient was waking up. She realized her voice had triggered something within the ship. The symbols that had once glowed faintly around her chamber now shone bright and alive. They moved in patterns, swirling like a dance. The aliens began to whisper among themselves. Their tones were fast and nervous. She couldn't catch every word, but she understood enough. They were saying that the dragon tongue hadn't been spoken for thousands of years, not even by their kind. It was considered the first and most sacred language, one that only the ancient beings known as the first speakers could use. The girl stood there, breathless, unsure if she should be scared or proud. Her voice, something she never understood fully, had stopped their mockery in a single moment. She looked at them now, and instead of fear, she felt calm. The sound that had come out of her wasn't violent or angry. It was powerful but pure, filled with something like light. The aliens slowly lowered their heads as if bowing. It was strange to see them like that. Creatures who once mocked her now stood in silence, waiting for her to speak again. She didn't know what they wanted, but deep down, she knew something important had changed. The balance between them had shifted. She whispered a few more tones, softly this time. The sound glowed faintly in the air, leaving golden ripples around her. The aliens gasped as if watching something sacred. For a moment, there was no fear, no pride, no walls, just a shared silence filled with wonder. She finally understood something then. The language she had spoken wasn't just words. It was emotion, truth, and connection all at once. It was the voice that connected hearts, minds, and souls beyond any boundary. For the first time since she had arrived, She didn't feel alone. The mocking had ended, replaced by awe and silence. She realized that the same sound that once felt strange inside her had always been her greatest strength. It wasn't about being smarter or stronger. It was about being connected to something far bigger than herself. As the lights in the chamber flickered gently, and the aliens continued to watch her in wonder, she looked down at her trembling hands and whispered to herself in a voice both human and something beyond, "Now they can finally hear me." And for the first time, the universe listened. The girl stood in the center of the glowing hall, her voice still echoing softly around her. The aliens stared at her in silence. Their glowing eyes no longer looked proud or mocking. Instead, they were filled with respect and fear. None of them moved for a long time. Even the ship itself felt alive now, humming quietly as if it was listening to her every breath. She didn't understand everything that had happened, but she knew one thing clearly. Something deep and ancient inside her had awakened. The tall alien, the one who used to mock her the most, slowly stepped forward. His voice, once filled with arrogance, now trembled slightly as he spoke. The sound he made wasn't harsh anymore. It was low, soft, and filled with meaning. She didn't know how she understood, but she did. His words reached straight into her mind, not through translation but through feeling. He said, "You carry the voice of the first ones. The first ones." The name sent a strange shiver through her. She looked around as the other aliens lowered their heads slightly, almost as if they were standing in front of something holy. She didn't feel powerful. She didn't even feel special. She just felt confused and small in this giant ship, full of glowing symbols and beings that had once laughed at her. But now their eyes were full of something she had never seen from them before: faith. The alien leader continued speaking slowly, explaining that long before their species existed, there were beings who traveled the stars freely. They were known as the dragon speakers, creatures of both mind and light. They didn't use weapons or ships to travel. They used language, pure sound that shaped energy, opened paths through the galaxies, and connected life from one world to another. That language, the dragon tongue, had disappeared thousands of years ago. No one knew how to speak it anymore. It was believed to be lost forever, until now. The girl listened quietly, her heart beating fast. She couldn't understand how she was connected to them. She was human. Just an ordinary girl from Earth who liked solving puzzles and listening to strange sounds in her dreams. But somehow those dreams weren't dreams at all. Maybe they were memories, something ancient echoing through her bloodline. Maybe, without knowing it, she had carried that forgotten voice within her all her life. The aliens seemed unsure what to do next. They didn't treat her like a prisoner anymore. Instead, they opened her chamber and she walked out freely for the first time since her arrival. The metal floor felt cold under her feet. The hall stretched endlessly in both directions, filled with symbols that glowed brighter as she passed by. The ship itself seemed to recognize her. Whenever she looked at the glowing walls, patterns appeared, shifting like a living language trying to speak to her. As she walked, the leader led her into a wide circular room. In the center of it floated a golden orb of light, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. He told her it was the memory core of their people, their history, their voices, their ancient truths. He bowed his head slightly and said, "Only the dragon tongue can awaken it completely." She didn't know what to do, but something inside her guided her. She closed her eyes, took a slow breath, and began to hum softly. At first the sound was small and uncertain, but then it grew stronger, deeper, and more beautiful. It wasn't just her voice anymore. It felt like 1,000 voices singing through her. The light in the room began to swirl and expand, filling the air with glowing symbols that moved like living stars. The aliens gasped in awe. The orb in the center opened slowly like a blooming flower, releasing waves of golden light that wrapped around everyone. The girl saw visions, ancient beings made of light and sound, soaring through the stars like dragons of energy. She saw how they had once spoken to all species, teaching them balance and peace through their language. But greed and pride had silenced that voice long ago. Worlds fell into darkness and the connection between species was lost. Tears rolled down her cheeks as the images faded. She realized that the dragon tongue wasn't just about power. It was about understanding, empathy, and unity. It was the voice that connected hearts beyond form and distance. The aliens bowed deeply, their voices trembling as they said, "The voice has returned." For the first time, the girl felt no fear, no anger, and no confusion. Only peace. She didn't belong to Earth or to them completely. She belonged to the space between where understanding was born. She looked up at the leader and said softly, "I'm just a human. I don't know how this happened." He nodded slowly. "Humans are not as simple as they believe," he replied. "Perhaps your world still carries the echoes of the first ones." His tone was calm now, almost kind. Then he said something that stayed in her mind forever. "The voice chose you." After that, they treated her like a guest, not a captive. They showed her their world through giant windows where stars burned brighter than she had ever seen. They taught her how they traveled through galaxies using sound, not engines. And in return, she taught them small things about humanity, how humans laughed, cried, dreamed, and hoped. The aliens listened with quiet fascination, realizing for the first time that emotions too were a kind of language. Days turned into weeks. The ship eventually returned to Earth's orbit. The leader came to her one last time. "We must leave," he said, "but the voice will remain with you. One day when your world is ready, others will hear it again." He raised his hand and a beam of soft light surrounded her. She felt weightless for a moment, her vision fading into white. When she opened her eyes again, she was standing in a quiet field under the night sky. The ship was gone. Only the stars above reminded her that it had all been real. She looked up, half expecting to see the same glowing symbols in the sky, but there was only the soft light of the moon and the whisper of wind. For a long time she stood there, just breathing. The earth felt smaller now, yet more beautiful than ever. The sky that once seemed so distant now felt alive, full of hidden voices and memories. She closed her eyes and listened carefully. At first there was only silence, but then faintly she heard it again. The deep melodic hum that had followed her all her life. The dragon tongue. It wasn't coming from the sky anymore, it was coming from within her. She smiled softly. It didn't scare her anymore. Instead, it felt like home. She sat down on the grass, feeling the cool earth under her hands, and whispered a few tones gently into the night. The sound was peaceful, flowing like a breeze. The stars above flickered faintly as if answering back. Days passed, but she never told anyone what happened. Some people noticed a change in her, a quiet confidence in her eyes as if she carried a secret too big for words. She went back to her old life, but deep inside, she knew she wasn't the same person anymore. She had touched something eternal. Every night she would look up at the stars and the sound would return, soft, ancient, and comforting. Sometimes when the wind blew just right, she could almost hear faint echoes replying to her from far away, as if the aliens were still listening. She realized something simple but powerful, that intelligence alone didn't make anyone special. What truly mattered was connection, understanding, the willingness to listen even to what seemed impossible. That was the real language of the universe. The girl smiled, her eyes shining under the starlight. The sky was no longer something to fear or wonder about. It was something she was part of. And as the night deepened, her voice rose again, gentle and full of life, carrying the ancient melody of the dragon tongue into the endless sky. For the first time in human history, the stars listened back.